Personalized Learning webinar. We will get started in just about 30 seconds. Just seeing the number of people are still joining, so we'll wait just about half more minute and then get started. And before we get started, I would invite you to take a minute to introduce yourself. There's a chat box on the left side of your screen. Just let us know who you are and where you're signing in from. And as the webinar progresses at any time, feel free to ask questions or leave a comment. We encourage an active discussion as we have our webinars. We want you to learn from each other as well as from today's presenters. And so without further ado, let me introduce myself and kick off the webinar as folks introduce themselves. My name is Maria Worthen. I'm the Vice President for Federal and State Policy at iNACOL. And I'd like to thank you for joining us today for a special edition webinar on promising state policies for personalized learning, with a very, very special thanks to the National Conference of State Legislatures for co-hosting this with us today. If you're just signing in, please go ahead and introduce yourself on the side and ask any questions that you might have. Today's webinar highlights the opportunities that states have to create supportive policy environments that make room for innovations that increase equity and refocus K-12 education around student-centered learning. iNACOL provides policy advocacy and lawmaker education to foster innovation, expand access to educational opportunity, and ensure quality. In our work, which is informed by our almost 5,000 members who are working across the K-12 spectrum as frontline innovators, we are often asked which states policymakers can look to in crafting policies that are supportive of personalized learning in their own states. The report that we're highlighting today, which you can download at inacol.org, is the first of its kind in that it provides specific examples that states can customize for their own education systems. With that, let me introduce today's speakers. So, as I said, my name is Maria Worthen. I lead iNACOL Center for Policy Advocacy. Our other presenters are Dale Frost, iNACOL State Policy Director, Susan Gens, iNACOL's Policy Manager, and Sunny Day, who is the Program Principal for Education at NCSL. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Sunny, who will introduce herself and NCSL.
Thanks so much to my friends at iNACOL, including legislators and staff in this webinar. I'm Sunny at NCSL, and for those of you who are familiar with us, the Conference of State Legislatures is the professional development organization for legislators and legislative staff. We serve all 50 state legislatures in a bipartisan manner, 50 state information, research, and best practice. Our education program consists of policy staff, expertise in K-12 and higher education course issues. Key constituents are the NCSL Standing Committee on Education, which includes about 4 state legislators and legislative staff from education committees in all 50 states. Our Education Committee Chair Network, which includes chairs from every state, and the Legislative Staff Network, with approximately 200 legislative staff, draft legislation, policy assistance, staff legislative committees in the states. Of promising policies for personalized learning set by iNACOL organized in a way that should be tremendously useful to state legislators and staff. as they take of existing practice and environments in their own and think about what they can do toward personalized learning. Issues include competency-based learning, meaningful assessments, and flexible ways to graduation are of great interest to state policymakers. And I look forward to with iNACOL today and in coming months to study how they're moving forward with these policies and what assistance we and other partners can provide. Thank you so much, Maria. I'll let you take it here.
Great. Thank you so much, Sunny. I just want to share this slide that you can all go to the link, which we'll also put in the chat box with NCSL's resources on personalized learning. And if anyone's got their talk button toggled, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, and if you could just untoggle that, it will. There we go. All right, thank you. So iNACOL recently published the Promising State Policies for Personalized Learning paper. As I said, it's available at inacol.org. This report, which we will go over in detail today, provides state policy strategies to scale personalized learning. And we want to emphasize that there are multiple entry points. Whether a state is just getting started, whether they have some work or policies that they are able to build on, or whether they are at a more advanced point. There are policy recommendations and examples that can be tailored for each state's unique situation. And I'd like to give a special welcome to any state legislators, staff, and policymakers that have joined us today. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we stand ready along with NCSL to assist you in any effort. Before we get started, just to level set, what do we mean by personalized learning? You may have heard a variety of different uses of this term, but for iNACOL, personalized learning is tailoring learning for each student's strengths, needs, and interests, including enabling student voice and choice in what, how, when, and where they learn, to provide flexibility and support to ensure mastery of the highest standards possible. You'll notice that when I read this definition, we don't see the word technology anywhere in here. And that's because although technology is an important tool for personalizing learning at scale, it's not the primary driver. Personalization is truly about enabling student voice and choice and making education relevant and engaging to them. And a recent study from the RAND Corporation found that students attending schools using these personalized learning models made gains that were significantly greater than a comparison group made up of similar students. So there is emerging research that this is an effective strategy. This map shows where states were in their policies to enable competency-based education, which is a framework for personalizing learning. Competency-based education allows students to advance upon demonstrated mastery. It has clearly articulated competencies. It engages students. It makes assessment a meaningful experience for students. And it includes real-world application of skills. And in 2012, and if you're having a hard time reading the key, that's okay. The red states are the most advanced states. The green states are developing, and the yellow states are emerging. This was the policy landscape. Now in 2016, we're seeing a lot more color on this map, which means that we're seeing a lot more states moving up into the advanced or coming into developing and emerging. And this is an important point because In December of this past year, Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which the President signed into law, and which will replace No Child Left Behind. And this law creates significant space for personalized learning and competency-based education to flourish if states choose to take up the opportunity. However, this is not a top-down mandate. The room that this law provides does not require personalized learning or competency-based education, but rather it creates space and opportunity. And again, looking at this progression of policies from 2012 to 2016 in the state, we see that it's actually the evolution of policy in the states that created some of the upward pressure on the federal government to update the outdated No Child Left Behind law, which really tied the hands of educators to focus on students where they were in their learning through time-bound accountability and assessment and human capital practices. And so today, when we talk about state policy, it's inextricably linked with also what's now possible under the federal policy. And I just want to underscore the fact that although the federal policy makes the room, it dovetails with the work that has already been going on in many states across the country. So in a minute, we're going to get into the policy recommendations and examples from the report. And I just want to give an overview. As we looked at the various policies that create room and enable personalized learning, we emerged our thinking around how states can enter a continuum of entry points. So rather than just presenting a list of the policy opportunities, thinking about where your state might be along this continuum and how they can build on where they are. I think this continuum provides a visual that's helpful. And there's no best way to do this. There's no right way to do this. Each state has their own dynamics, has their own political climate, has their own capacity. And so in thinking about what strategies you might like to pursue in your state, it's important to engage the stakeholders that will be responsible for implementing this in K-12 in what works best for the state. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers, Susan Gens and Dale Frost, who will be tag teaming a bit on the details of the report. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maria. Good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to discussing this report with all of you today, and we're going to get started on an entry point. I don't want to say the first entry point because, as Maria said, states are coming in from all different places, and so I am going to try my best to not number any of these because it can be, you can start anywhere where your state is ready. But the first one I'm going to talk about today is the creation of a competency-based education task force. Policymakers can foster thought leadership and create a space for dialogue between other policymakers, stakeholders, and communities across the state by establishing a formal statewide task force. I'm sure you've seen other task forces be put into law for various topics. So this one, of course, would be specific to competency-based education. But they're very helpful. They can enable competency-based education by encouraging state leaders to develop deeper understanding on the need and the benefits for creating competency-based pathways to ensure student success and the importance for educators to personalize learning to meet students' needs. Competency-based education task forces allow conversations to happen in low-stake environments, and it leads to a more thorough understanding of what is possible, and it also creates a space where ideas can be freely exchanged, and also concerns can be discussed because this is new for a lot of places and states. And so the task force allows that free exchange of ideas without some outside pressures to just discuss and really talk about what is best for your state specifically. The example that we use in our report is Iowa. They created a task force in 2012, so it's already been a few years ago, and they had specific ideas that they were trying to address in their task force. Again, I want to reiterate that every state could be looking at different issues they want to address. So I'm going to share with you what Iowa did with theirs, but also keep in mind that if there are different things that your state needs to really look at and consider, this is a great place to do it. And just because Iowa didn't doesn't mean that you can't. So some of the things that Iowa looked at, they charged their task force with looking at competency-based instruction standards, the integration of competency-based instruction with the Iowa core state academic standards, and developing assessment models and professional development. So they also engaged with New Hampshire and Alaska while they were looking at it. Task forces are a great way to make sure you're talking with other states to see what they've done, and maybe that doesn't work for you, but at least you know the path that they took. And I also just want to share with you the story of Iowa and their final recommendations that came out of their task force. So they recommended allowing students younger than 9th grade to earn credit in any curricular area toward graduation if they complete the requirements for the credit. They recommended removing the restriction that students' advancement in credit may be used only in the areas of English or language arts, mathematics, science, or social studies. And they recommended establishing a research partnership with an institution of higher education to monitor and evaluate competency-based education systems. And they also did a recommendation on updating broadband availability and the recommendation to create 2 full-time equivalent positions with a combination of expertise to include at least competency-based education leadership in a educational environment by educators and students for monitoring and reporting. So another reason task forces are very helpful is because you also make sure you have expertise in the task force as well as educators, and so that those two views and any other stakeholder views can come together and discuss during the task force.
Thank you, SG. So the next policy is credit flexibility, probably one of the most generally applied policies amongst the states. So these policy approaches allow schools to move from basing high school credit for graduation solely on the number of hours students spend in the classroom to demonstrated mastery. So the first approach is seat time waivers, which allow districts to request flexibility from the state to do this. West Virginia is an example of a state that has a seat time waiver policy. It allows districts to base credit on demonstrated mastery, but those districts first must obtain a waiver from the state for every course. You can see that is sometimes problematic for school districts. Credit flexibility is the second approach, is a preferable approach because it offers blanket authority to school districts to move away from seat time. So Oregon is a good example of that. It allows school districts to grant credit if a student demonstrates mastery through such things as student work inside and outside the classroom, documenting prior learning, passing appropriate exams designed to measure proficiency, or providing other evidence that demonstrates proficiency of state standards. The last approach is competency-based redesign policies, which are much more comprehensive. This approach includes rethinking how students earn credits by redefining the Carnegie unit into specific standards and competencies. And it eliminates definitions of credits using seat time. So New Hampshire, many of you are aware, is the most advanced state to move down this path. In 2005, the New Hampshire adopted rules requiring high schools to base academic credit on mastery rather than seat time. It gave a grace period to districts from 2005-2008 to allow them to decide on whether they want to award high school credit based on seat time or mastery. But after that, New Hampshire required its high schools to award credit solely based on students demonstrating mastery of required competencies. And also, during that same time, re-examined its state policies to remove those policies that reinforce or are based on seat time. So those are three different approaches under the umbrella of credit flexibility. As I said, states have made great progress on this policy over the last few years. At least 42 states have created at least some flexibility for school districts to base academic credit on mastery rather than only on seat time. What is clear, though, is permission alone is not enough. States making progress towards personalized learning and showing real growth in this area most often pair this policy with some of the other strategies we are discussing today. SG, back to you.
Thanks, Dale. The next policy that we want to talk about today are innovation zones. Innovation zones create room for districts and schools to develop new learning models by offering waivers and exemptions from certain administrative regulations or statutory provisions. State policy leaders create innovation zones to provide district and school leaders with the flexibility they need to innovate and develop new personalized learning models. Innovation zones offer state education policy waivers in order to support practitioners in the process of developing and implementing new learning models. We have two states that we specifically cite in the report that have done innovation zones and have we've seen growth through them. In Kentucky, they actually passed their law in 2012, and their policy states that districts of innovation shall be provided flexibility from selected Kentucky administrative regulations, Kentucky revised statutes, and local Board of Education policies for school administrators, teachers, and staff to meet the diverse needs of students. We have seen great growth happen and really outside of the box thinking for schools who have these innovation zones. It really does force educators to rethink what their classroom could look like, and I like the phrase dream big for this. So Kentucky has a couple of things in place too that are really interesting and just show that this is something that the educators want and not just something that was mandated by the legislators. For instance, participating districts are required to commit to improving student performance, and in each district must obtain 70% approval of the plan from teachers before being granted the innovation zone status. 70% is a lot of people who have to want it in order for them to get granted this innovation zone status. And some of the examples of exemptions from the rules that are included for Kentucky innovation zones are seat time policies, average daily attendance calculation, and other barriers to participating in internships, learning opportunities, and after-school programs outside of school walls. So those are just some of the ideas that the innovation zones have taken place in Kentucky. And again, if your state has different requirements that they need to be waived from that are proving to be barriers, then this is definitely a policy that could help with getting those barriers out of the way for the schools that are ready to do that. And just really quickly, Colorado's law provides opportunities for schools and districts to develop innovative practices, better meet the needs of individual students, and allow more autonomy to make decisions at the school level. So both of those states have done a lot of work with these innovation zones. And the next policy that we're going to talk to you about are pilot programs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with pilot programs, but what they do is examine which strategies work in practice. A successful pilot program will help lead to sharing and scaling best practices in other localities. Ultimately, state pilot efforts can provide resources to be shared statewide and build increased understanding for how student-centered learning can be transformative. Now, there are many different elements of pilot programs. Some can include funding, planning, and launch phases, convening practitioners and educators to share best practices through communities of practice, building educator capacity for personalized learning, developing common performance assessments, and fostering a process of continuous improvement, sharing, and collaboration rather than top-down compliance in monitoring pilots. So these are just programs that states can use to make sure that they understand what works well, not only in a small area, but then ways to scale up that program, kind of learning what works and what doesn't through that pilot. And Ohio is our example that we cite in the report for the pilot program. And they do many different things in their pilots, including promoting innovative learning that has meaning to students and cuts across multiple curriculum areas and extends outside of the classroom, and informing future development of statewide competency education policies and programs. There are many more provisions in the pilot, and it's all in our report if you would like to see that more in depth.
The next strategy creates multiple flexible pathways to high school credit and graduation, and as well as to post-secondary education and to the workforce. All of these policies pathways are rigorous and they maintain high expectations. That's a really important point here. And they allow students to pursue their interests and gain real-world skills, knowledge, and experiences. We know that every student is different, and multiple pathways are a way to really bring meaning and joy to schooling for a lot of students, especially those who can get disenfranchised from school. These pathways allow students to learn in many places, including outside of the classroom, like after-school programs, apprenticeships, community service, internships, independent study, online learning, even performing arts, private instruction and tutoring, CTE, and college-level coursework. The pathways allow students to customize their education to meet their unique needs, interests, and circumstances. So a great example of a state that has pursued multiple flexible pathways is New York. In that state, students have to pass exams in English, math, science, and social studies. They're called the Regents exams. In January 2015, the New York Board of Regents approved changes to its high school graduation requirements to allow students to choose which fifth exam they must pass in order to graduate. Students can choose from a wide range of examinations and pathways in the arts, career and technical education, in another language. Also, students can go deeper in the humanities and sciences. What this has done has really encouraged schools to offer new, exciting pathways for students. P-TECH is a successful early college model in New York and a really great pathway for students that bridges high school and the early post-secondary years. It prepares thousands of students for highly skilled jobs in technology, manufacturing, healthcare, and finance. Important parts of the P-TECH model are that it delivers workplace learning, ongoing mentoring by professionals in a student's chosen career sector. Students get to visit work sites and participate in internships and learn from multiple speakers across career clusters. Another interesting part is that students do progress through the program at their own pace. And students who successfully complete a P-TECH program earn an Associate of Applied Science degree and receive preference in job placement with participating business partners. The last example that I wanted to show was that a number of states have recognized the need for more people trained in computer science and information technology, and they've created academies to help schools create pathways that lead to meaningful skills in these fields. One example is Microsoft Imagine Academy. It provides training in industry-recognized certifications in Microsoft Word, Excel, Access, and Project, as well as more advanced topics like programming, web development, and database administration. Microsoft Imagine Academy has partnered with a number of states to provide access to all of the high school students within those states, including Washington State, North Carolina, and West Virginia. So the next group of policies are best fit those states that we call states moving forward. This category of states often already have a cohort of pilot or pioneering schools and already have a foundation of understanding for the shift and transformation to personalized learning. These policies, proficiency-based diplomas, modernized systems of assessment, and state initiatives to build local capacity are all meant to scale personalized learning from smaller scale demonstrations to a prevailing approach. So the first of these policies, proficiency-based diplomas, require graduation decisions to be based on demonstrated proficiency rather than on credits based on seat time. We probably all remember those courses that we learned more from and those that we might have learned less in. It creates a level playing field and ensures that students graduate prepared to succeed in post-secondary education, the workforce, and life. They also, proficiency-based diplomas, create a powerful incentive for schools to move to student-centered learning in order to ensure that students can demonstrate high levels of mastery to graduate. So one good example of proficiency-based diplomas is Vermont. In 2013, their State Board of Ed passed proficiency-based graduation requirements for students graduating in the year 2020 and beyond. Local school districts still have control to adopt their own specific graduation requirements, but their requirements have to adhere to state standards in 8 domains. These include domains that are common across the country: literacy, mathematics, scientific inquiry, but they also include things like physical education, artistic expression, and they have a domain called transferable skills, which include communication, collaboration, creativity, problem solving, and the use of technology. In Vermont, students are allowed to show mastery in a lot of different ways, including teacher-designed assessments, papers, presentations, portfolios, and projects. Moving on to Maine, Maine is well known for its proficiency-based diplomas and has made a lot of progress towards implementation of these diplomas. Originally, all high schools had to implement proficiency-based diplomas by 2018, but that was recently pushed back this legislative session. There were concerns that students wouldn't be adequately prepared by 2018, and the new requirement is that students must demonstrate mastery on a subset of the 8 domains starting in 2021, and that requirement phases fully in by 2025 when students have to show proficiency in all content domains. The last state I wanted to highlight for you that's in the report is Arizona, which took a very different approach to proficiency-based diplomas. They created a mastery-based diploma called the Grand Canyon Diploma. And high schools can voluntarily opt into issuing this diploma. Students graduate with a Grand Canyon Diploma by earning scores determined to be equivalent to college readiness on an approved battery of assessments, primarily the Cambridge assessments and ACT Quality Core. What we find is those high schools that are moving towards the Grand Canyon Diploma and utilizing it are making a lot of the same changes, but it's not a requirement for all high schools in the state of Arizona. So many different ways to approach this, but proficiency-based diplomas are a very promising way to encourage schools to move in the direction of personalized learning. SG, back to you.
Thanks, Dale. The next issue area that we're going to talk about is the area of modernizing systems of assessment. As Maria mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have a new, recently reauthorized federal education bill, the Every Student Succeeds Act. This bill provides states and localities flexibility that can be used to create competency-based personalized learning environments. The passage of ESSA in December ushered in a new era. We have now before us a historic opportunity to rethink systems of assessments to support continuous improvement of student-centered learning. ESSA allows states to design systems of assessments that provide data to support continuous real-time improvement of student learning towards college and career readiness, rapid closure of subgroup achievement gaps, and provide flexibility to align with and support next-generation learning models. All states now have may now develop systems of assessments for federal accountability purposes that incorporate individual student growth, use multiple measures of student learning from multiple points in time to determine summative scores, and use adaptive assessments that can measure where students are in their learning. A new innovative assessment pilot allows up to 7, initially, states to design and pilot in their learning. With a subset of districts, statewide systems of assessments that include locally developed assessment items. ESSA specifically permits the use of competency-based assessments, instructionally embedded assessments, interim assessments, cumulative year-end assessments, computer adaptive assessments, and performance-based assessments. Allowing multiple assessments throughout the year provides an important step forward for competency-based education, as it opens up the possibility to administer assessments when students are ready to take them. And for this, we look to New Hampshire and their PACE, Performance Assessment for Competency Education program. In 2012, New Hampshire began to pilot this new system of assessments that supported the state's comprehensive shift away from seat time. There are 6 key components to PACE, and they include common performance tasks that have high technical quality, locally designed performance tasks with guidelines for ensuring high technical quality, regional scoring sessions and local district peer review audits to ensure sound accountability systems and high inter-rater reliability, a web-based bank of local and common performance tasks, and a regional support network for districts and schools. This is just one state that has really dug into the systems of assessments and making sure that they are modernized to allow for these different assessments and the multiple measures to really understand where students are and to meet them where they are as well.
So the final strategy for states moving forward are initiatives to build local capacity. The real work occurs at the local level. States have a very important role to remove barriers and to support innovators. And so there are really 5 approaches that we identified as common amongst many states on how they support the building of local capacity to transform education to personalized learning. The first of these strategies is simply providing information. The Kentucky Department of Education is a good example. On their website, they provide a lot of useful, curated information to help Kentucky districts and schools, and anyone for that matter, to move to personalized learning. There's a lot of stuff and information out there, and providing some good curated resources is a help to get school district leaders to start thinking about what does it mean to move towards personalized learning and what are the changes that need to occur. The second is offering technical assistance. We'll provide an example in a second. The third is creating specialized training. New Hampshire is also a good example of this. SG just talked about the PACE program and how New Hampshire is really leading the way to pioneer innovative, more personalized assessment systems. And so in addition to that, what New Hampshire is doing is they're implementing a tiered system of supports and training to build capacity within school districts on implementing and creating student-centered assessment systems. So the training involves things like performance task development, instructional design considerations, and then creating local structures such as professional learning communities to support this work. The fourth approach that states have been using is to create or facilitate peer learning and peer learning networks. The Iowa Department of Education created the Iowa CBE, or Competency-Based Education Collaborative. It was one of the recommendations of the CBE task force. This collaborative regularly convenes leadership teams from each of the 10 participating school districts, and these teams work together and share information on model competencies and performance assessments. They help each other share and create tools and processes, and then they share the challenges and lessons learned from implementing competency-based education. Finally, leveraging partnerships will move forward. to the next slide, these are a few more examples. So on leveraging partnerships, the New England states have worked very effectively, specifically Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont have partnered with and worked extensively with the Great Schools Partnership and the New England Secondary School Consortium to advance student-centered learning in their states. These partner organizations provide a lot of capacity to help local school districts implement personalized learning. As an example, in 2014, the Vermont Agency of Education set aside resources and offered monthly seminars to school districts to provide guidance, technical assistance, professional development, consultations, and time to plan these action plans to implement personalized proficiency-based learning in their local school systems. The Great Schools Partnership ran those seminars and has trained personnel in approximately half of Vermont school districts to move towards personalized learning. The final example is offering technical assistance. Arkansas is a good example of that. They created and have the Arkansas Office of Innovation for Education, which is a partnership between the Arkansas Department of Ed and the University of Arkansas. And this office provides research and technical assistance for schools to create student-centered learning environments. The office employs specialists who go into schools and work to match personalized learning approaches and models with each school's specific needs and contexts. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the different ways that schools or states are helping schools to make this transformation. And we think that this is a key part to seeing personalization occur at scale to really build the capacity of local educators and school leaders. So the final approach is called a comprehensive statewide policy approach. This combines a number of the previous policies into a coordinated system with the purpose of transforming all schools and student experiences to personalized learning. Two important pieces of this approach are common performance assessments and, as I had just mentioned, building capacity in local school systems, but specifically to implement personalized learning and to build the professional judgment and capacity of people to equitably and accurately grade common performance assessment items. So those are two pieces of comprehensive statewide approaches. We wanted to highlight Vermont in a little more detail. So in 2013, the Vermont legislature passed Act 77, and during that same year, the Vermont State Board of Ed approved revised education quality standards. These two policies together created a strong, comprehensive policy approach for personalized proficiency-based learning to thrive and scale throughout the state. So what were in those regulations? Well, we have already talked about Vermont's proficiency-based graduation requirements, but in addition, the state requires every high school student to develop a personalized learning plan to measure their progress towards those proficiency-based graduation requirements. Also, schools are required to develop comprehensive systems of assessment, including performance-based assessments, to determine student progress and supports along the way. As for accountability and continuous improvement, on a 2-year cycle in Vermont, each school submits a continuous improvement plan that outlines the school's accomplishments and progress goals and strategies for improvement. And all continuous improvement plans are reviewed by Vermont Agency of Education staff, as well as goes through a peer review process with Vermont educators. That feedback back to schools is a powerful continuous improvement process, and is just being implemented. In addition, Vermont's Act 77 really stressed flexible multiple pathways. And Vermont, from dual enrollment to early college programs to work-based study, is developing many options that are relevant and meaningful to students. Finally, the state has worked to develop educator capacity to make this transformation a reality. We already talked about training that Great Schools Partnership provided. In addition, state regulations require school districts to create professional learning groups for all teachers that are facilitated by trained teachers, and these groups must meet for at least 2 hours per month. Districts also have to develop and implement systems of appropriate needs-based professional learning and mentoring for all professional staff. That really creates the time to build teams that can implement these personalized learning plans and to create a continuous improvement process within local school systems. Since these policies were passed in 2013, school districts are just beginning to implement them, but they hold promise to help all Vermont students pursue their interests and passions and graduate prepared to succeed. I do want to point out, though, that Vermont is a small state. Unlike many states, they can get many of the players in the same room and move comprehensively as a state. You know, I looked at their population. The population of Vermont is less than some student populations in other states. That works very well for Vermont. Every state, as we have stressed before, is really going to have to figure out what approach makes sense given their policy context and education systems. SG, back to you.
So after we've talked about all of these promising policies, we have to realize that now is the time to be thinking about them. With the passage of ESSA, states now have the flexibility to engage in conversations with local communities and reimagine the future of education and redefine what student success looks like. We should be asking questions like, what do we want our students to know and be able to do in the 21st century? How can we rethink preparation programs to ensure our educators have the skills and competencies for next generation learning models? And how do we create policy alignment and support for student-centered learning? There are key areas that policymakers should begin to address during this time. Things like, how do we create forward-thinking accountability systems that are aligned to student-centered learning and focus on a better balance of indicators for supporting continuous improvement? How do we establish new systems of assessments with multiple measures designed to support competency-based learning? How do we redesign teacher and school leader professional development and preparation to prepare them to take on new roles to effectively deliver personalized learning? And finally, how do we align educator standards and competencies in collaboration with higher education and licensing and certification stakeholders to the skills and professional responsibilities needed in personalized competency-based learning environments? These are all very important aspects to a personalized competency-based learning environment, and now is the time for us to be thinking about them. In terms of accountability, rather than using limited time-bound metrics of student achievement, policymakers can design next-generation accountability systems with real-time data to better identify the schools and students who need more supports to be successful. Next-generation accountability models will utilize multiple measures and indicators of student progress to support continuous improvement throughout the year. ESSA provides an opportunity to design new accountability models to ensure equity by focusing on a better balance of indicators for supporting continuous improvement, such as addressing all students are on track for graduation, closing achievement gaps by serving vulnerable students, analyzing effectiveness based on the amount of learning per unit of time, and better determining cost effectiveness for amount of learning per unit of time with time-bound targets. Multiple measures in new accountability systems require at least 3 academic indicators: proficiency, growth, and graduation rates, and at least 1 indicator of non-academic factors such as school climate, access to educational opportunity, access to AP courses, and parent and student satisfaction surveys. Teacher preparation, there's also a lot of opportunity there to make sure that teachers are ready for our new personalized system. A highly trained and engaged educator workforce will be the single most important driver of a successful personalized competency-based education system. Dale talked about this already with the capacity for our educators, and there's going to be a shift for the role, and many new personalized learning pathways will require new skills to adapt instruction for students with varying levels of competency and interest. This will require a significant change to pre-service preparation, professional development, and evaluation frameworks to ensure educators have the support and resources to make this transition. And I think with that, we will turn it. You know, this is just a great quote. We aren't done innovating until 100% of our students are graduating. just a reminder of why we're doing all this and working on these policies, that it is to ensure that every student has access to the education that they deserve, and these are why we think these policies are going to do great things for our education system as we move forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sunny.
Sunny, is your talk button toggled? We can't hear you. Okay, well, while we're waiting for Sunny, let me just say big thank you to Susan Gens and Dale Frost for highlighting the findings in the report. And at this point, I would encourage you to ask any questions or share any information from your own state that you'd like to address during the Q&A. Sunny, are you there?
Well,
okay, it looks like we've lost. There you are. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure. Is this working or no?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, super. Listen, I apologize that I cut out earlier. I just want to thank again iNACOL for including legislators and legislative staff in this webinar. And just to acknowledge that these issues that you were discussing today are exactly the kinds of questions that we're getting from state legislators about competency-based learning, meaningful assessments, and flexible pathways to graduation. These are at the top of legislators' minds as they're working through their ESSA plans. And I do want to mention that there are several states, some of which were mentioned here, where legislators have taken the lead over the past couple of years in setting up pilot projects on competency-based or mastery-based learning, including Idaho in 2015 and Florida and Utah in 2016. And in fact, the Illinois legislature has also passed a pilot project legislation that's currently awaiting the governor's signature. So in the past couple of years, we're seeing unprecedented action by state legislators on some of these issues. Links to the legislation from those states are available on NCSL's website, and we're going to be closely watching the progress in those states, as well as studying the thorny issue of how state school funding systems can better support personalized learning. And so again, thanks to iNACOL for inviting NCSL to join the webinar and recognizing that state legislators are crucial actors in these conversations about how to personalize student learning to meet the needs of today's students. So again, thank you. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions or if I can help with your state work. And with that, I'll turn it back over with great thanks to iNACOL.
Great. Thank you so much, Sunny, and we so appreciate your co-hosting of this webinar and for all the great work you do to build the capacity of state legislators and share information across the country about what they're doing. And if you are a state legislator or staffer listening in today, we are stand ready to assist. Now, I do have a question for our presenters today. There are a number of folks on today's webinar who are not policymakers, but who may want to know what they can do to get involved and how this report might be a useful tool to them. And Dale, if I could just ask you, for the educators, advocates here today, how do you get started to start these conversations about creating space for personalized learning?
Well, in my experience with state leaders, whether it be in the Department of Ed or legislatures or governor's offices, they really want to hear from practitioners, and they want to support practitioners and taking these policies, sharing this report with your own local legislator, your State Department of Ed folks, just starting a conversation is very important. I think it is important to bring up that with the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act, states can really rethink their education system to meet the needs of every single student. So what does success look like? And let's start those conversations, and then from there have the conversations on what accountability, what assessment can look like, how do we prepare teachers to succeed in this environment. Those are conversations that we should be having right now. And then the other thing that I would suggest is that iNACOL provides technical assistance to policymakers and education and resources. So just connecting us with policymakers in your state can go a long way. And I'm sure NCSL, making those connections with practitioners and legislators is a powerful way to move these policies forward.
Yeah, this is Sunny. I would agree and just comment that that legislators very much appreciate seeing these things in person and hearing from their constituents about what's working and what isn't working. But absolutely getting legislators into schools or seeing some environments where these personalized learning strategies are thriving is one of the best ways to move policy forward in the states.
Great, thank you. One question we've gotten a lot about this report is if we can cite what the best state is, what is the best approach that folks should be looking at? And SG, could I ask you, is there a specific state that other states should be looking at, or do these examples represent the highest performing state on this? What do we do with these examples?
That's a great question, Maria. There's not one best state. Every state, as we know, has their different challenges, and so different policies play different roles for all of the different systems that are already in place within the state. So I know some people have looked and thought, oh, Vermont is the best, but I think Dale did a great job of saying, yes, it's a comprehensive strategy, but it's also very small, and so for what works in Vermont might not work in a larger state. So it's very important to remember that not all of these strategies are best for your state, but it's about coming together and working on the ones that will work best and that will serve your students and educators the best as well.
Yeah, and I would also add that what we looked at with this report was the policies themselves rather than the implementation. And a policy is only good as its implementation. And so while some states may have the best policy on the books, they may not have the best implementation. Conversely, there are some states that don't have much policy on the books, but they're doing a great job at the sub-policy level of supporting the districts that are wanting to move forward with personalized learning. So policymakers, your work is incredibly important to create room, but we also need to think about, particularly with the opportunities that ESSA provides to rethink human capital in education, what it looks like to really create room and invest in the human capacity to move to a student-centered model of learning that requires very different skills than our traditional teacher preparation is preparing educators for. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions from the audience, but we've got our contact information up here on the screen, and I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions or input on the report. We invite you to check out the report at inacol.org, and while you're there, you can also register for the iNACOL Blended and Online Learning Symposium, which will be in San Antonio, Texas this year from October 25th to 28th. It is iNACOL's annual conference, which is the leading event for K-12 competency-based blended and online learning. Experts, practitioners, educators, policymakers, and researchers gather and work to transform education. And we hope to see you there. And we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.